Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. Today's podcast is Positive Thinking Before Sleep. Okay, so let's unpack this, but before we even get into the mechanics of what that title actually means, I need you to just close your eyes for a second.
Assuming you aren't driving, of course.
Right, yes, definitely don't close your eyes if you are operating heavy machinery. But I want you to imagine a scenario that I think is going to feel, painfully, viscerally familiar to just about everyone listening to this deep dive right now.
Oh, I'm sure we've all been there.
Without a doubt. So you have just survived a truly grueling day. And I don't mean just a busy day. I mean the kind of day that it drains the life force right out of you.
The kind where everything just drags.
Yes, we are talking about every single meeting dragging on for an eternity, where people are just talking in circles. The traffic on your commute home was an absolute nightmare.
Just a sea of red taillights.
Spot on. Blaring horns, the works. And to top it all off, right before you left your desk, you received this incredibly frustrating passive-aggressive email from a colleague or a boss.
Oh, the dreaded, as per my last email message.
Yes, the kind that just leaves you completely fuming. So your jaw is tight. Your shoulders are practically fused to your earlobes at this point.
The physical tension is just immense.
It really is. You finally drag yourself through your front door. You go through your mindless evening motions. Maybe you, eat something standing up in front of the fridge, and you collapse into bed.
You're just desperate for rest.
You get under the covers, the lights go out, the house is finally quiet, and then, bam! Your mind starts racing.
Like flipping a switch.
Right. And it is not just a light jog. It is a full-on sprint of what-ifs, regrets, replaying awkward conversations, mentally composing furious replies to that email.
And stressing about tomorrow's mountain of tasks.
Absolutely. It feels like your brain has suddenly turned into a late-night talk show where all the guests are your worst anxieties. Does that sound familiar?
That is a universally recognized human experience. It's actually a fascinating, albeit incredibly frustrating, paradox of our biology.
A paradox? How so?
Well, it is that exact moment where the physical body is just screaming for rest, but the brain decides, completely autonomously, that it's the perfect time to host a chaotic, high-stress review session of every perceived failure and upcoming threat.
So it's like a mutiny.
Spot on. You are physically horizontal, but neurologically, you are running on a treadmill maximum speed.
I am so glad to hear it is a biological paradox and not just me losing my mind every night at 11 p.m.
Oh, you are definitely not alone in that.
And that shared experience is what we are tackling in this deep dive today. We are on a mission to figure out how to flip the script on that intense bedtime anxiety.
It's a very worthy mission.
Because what we are going to explore is how dedicating just the last 30 to 60 minutes before sleep to intentional, structured, positive thinking is not just some, fluffy wellness trend.
Right. We aren't talking about empty hashtags on social media here.
Definitely not. We are talking about a rigorously researched, scientifically backed, neurologically sound strategy to build your confidence, drastically reduce your baseline daily stress, and here is where it gets really interesting for you, our listener, to absolutely supercharge your English language learning skills.
It really is an incredible connection. We are going to be breaking down the specific neurological why behind this phenomenon because the underlying science is profoundly elegant.
I love that word, elegant.
It really is. It's about taking back control of your brain's chemistry. And we will also explore several very specific real-world scenarios that are completely tailored for you as an English learner.
So we're making it super practical.
Absolutely. We will look at how this nightly practice directly applies to the struggles you face in the classroom, the intense anxiety of using a second language in the workplace, and even those complicated dynamics of family interactions.
Family dynamics can be the toughest part.
Without a doubt. And we aren't going to leave you with just theory. By the end of this deep dive, we are going to establish a concrete, step-by-step, 7-day plan so you can actually master this habit and make it work for your specific brain architecture.
I am so ready for this. I mean, the promise of better sleep and better English is the ultimate 2-for-1 deal.
It's a huge return on investment.
It really is. So let's jump right into the core mechanics. Before we even approach the topic of what we should be thinking about before we close our eyes, we really need to understand the timing.
The timing is crucial.
Why does the clock matter? Why is that specific 30 to 60 minute window right before bed so critical to our neurological development?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at how the human brain transitions between different states of consciousness. Your brain doesn't just have an on switch and an off switch.
Right, it's a fade out.
Accurately put. During that last 30 to 60 minute window before you actually fall asleep, your subconscious mind becomes hyper-receptive. Your brain waves begin to slow down, transitioning from the rapid beta waves of active thought into slower alpha and theta waves.
Okay, so things are gearing down.
Yes. In this transitional state, your brain is essentially like a giant, highly absorbent sponge. It is eagerly soaking up the final thoughts, the lingering emotions, and the last environmental inputs of your day.
So whatever's happening right then gets soaked up.
That's a brilliant observation. The critical factor here is that your conscious, rational mind, the part that usually filters out bad ideas or tells you not to worry, starts to power down.
Oh, wow. So the guard is essentially off duty.
Spot on. The filter's off, so the subconscious just absorbs whatever is currently playing in your head as absolute truth.
Okay, I want to test an analogy on you. Tell me if this actually tracks with the neuroscience.
Let's hear it.
It feels to me like leaving a high-powered computer to render a massive video file, or maybe like process a huge, complex batch of code overnight.
I like where this is going.
Right. If right before I walk away from the keyboard and turn off the monitor, I accidentally input a bunch of corrupted files, which in our biological case would be those negative, anxious thoughts about that passive-aggressive email, that computer is going to spend all night grinding away on bad data.
It's going to struggle.
Yeah, the fans are going to be worrying, the processor is overheating, and eventually the system is going to crash. You wake up the next morning and your operating system is just a sluggish mess.
And you feel terrible.
Exactly. I mean, undoubtedly. But if you feed it clean, optimized code right before you walk away, which would be the positive thoughts, it works smoothly and efficiently all night. Am I understanding the mechanism here, or is this just pop psychology jargon?
That analogy actually maps beautifully onto the physical structures of the brain. Let's look at the literal processor in your example, which is a mechanism called the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN. Okay, what does that actually do?
You can think of the DMN as the baseline background hum of your brain. It is an interconnected web of brain regions that becomes highly active, specifically when you are not focused on the outside world.
Oh, so like when you are just staring out a window, daydreaming?
Spot on.
Yeah.
When you are recalling distant memories, or most importantly for our discussion, when you are lying in the dark waiting for sleep to take over, your DMN takes the wheel.
Got it.
During that pre-sleep window, the DMN is essentially reviewing the raw footage of your day to decide what information is important enough to keep and what can be discarded.
So if I spend my pre-sleep time dwelling on that terrible email or beating myself up because I couldn't remember the right English vocabulary word during a meeting, my DMN is just taking that specific failure and playing it on an endless loop in the screening room of my mind.
That is the very real danger. And it doesn't just play the loop. It triggers a very physical cascade of chemical reactions in your body. When you feed your DMN stressful, negative thoughts, it sends a direct, urgent alarm signal to your amygdala.
The amygdala, I know that term. That is the deep, primitive part of the brain, right? The fight or flight center that evolved millions of years ago.
Yes, it is the brain's primary fear and threat detection center. Its entire job is to keep you alive in the face of physical danger.
But I'm just in bed thinking about an email.
And that is the problem. The amygdala cannot distinguish between the physical threat of a predator in the jungle and the psychological threat of a passive-aggressive email or a failed English exam.
Wow. So it reacts the same way to both.
Absolutely. When you feed it negativity before bed, you throw the amygdala into absolute overdrive. It assumes you are under attack. Consequently, it commands your adrenal glands to spike their production of cortisol.
And cortisol is the stress hormone, right?
Correct. It's the body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol elevates your heart rate, increases your respiratory rate, and effectively obliterates your ability to fall into a deep, restorative sleep cycle.
Because it thinks you need to run away.
Accurately stated. By worrying in bed, you are biologically commanding your body to stay awake, because it is not safe to be unconscious.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense. That explains the physical sensations of anxiety.
It really does.
When your heart is pounding against your ribs while you are lying in the pitch black worrying about a deadline, your brain literally thinks there is a tiger pacing at the foot of your bed.
And you cannot sleep when a tiger is in the room. Now let's look at the biological invert.
The positive side of things.
Yes. When you intentionally shift your focus to positive thinking in that critical 30 to 60 minute window, you effectively bypass the amygdala entirely.
You just skip the alarm system.
Exactly. Without a doubt. Instead, you activate and strengthen the prefrontal cortex. This is the sophisticated, evolutionary, newer part of your brain sitting right behind your forehead.
What does that part handle?
It is responsible for executive function, logic, emotional regulation, and complex problem solving. By activating the prefrontal cortex with intentional positivity, you are sending a neurological, all-clear signal to your nervous system. You are shutting off the cortisol drip.
Okay, I want to move away from my computer analogy for a second because there was a metaphor in the research that I thought was much more evocative.
Which one was that?
Well, I want to know if it holds up to scrutiny. The text described bedtime as a garden where you are planting seeds for the night.
Ah, yes, the garden metaphor.
If you go to bed stressed, those negative thoughts sow aggressively growing weeds that choke out your rest. But positive thoughts bloom into flowers by dawn.
It's very poetic.
It is a beautiful, poetic image, but as someone who likes hard facts, I have to ask, is there concrete peer-reviewed data backing up this idea of a biological garden?
The data is not just present, it is overwhelming. If we look at massive recent studies, specifically one tracking 500 adults to test this exact premise of nighttime thought curation, the results were physiological, not just psychological.
So they weren't just asking people how they felt.
Right. The researchers didn't just ask them for their feelings, they measured their sleep architecture. The participants who engaged in intentional, guided nighttime positivity experienced staggering shifts.
Like what? What did they find?
They slept, on average, 45 minutes longer per night than the control group.
Wait, really? 45 minutes of actual measurable sleep time, not just time spent lying in bed staring at the ceiling.
45 minutes of consolidated sleep. Furthermore, they reported a 35% reduction in generalized daytime anxiety.
That's a massive drop.
It is. But the metric that is most incredibly relevant for you, our listener, trying to master a complex skill like English, is that the positive thinking group significantly outperformed the control group on cognitive tests the following morning.
No way. Just from changing their pre-sleep thoughts.
That's right. Their brains were literally sharper, faster, and more capable of complex processing just by changing the diet of their thoughts before sleep.
45 extra minutes of sleep and a sharper brain just from changing what you think about before you close your eyes. That is an absurdly high return on investment.
It's the best ROI you can get.
It requires zero financial cost, no special equipment, just a redirection of attention.
Right.
So we know the sponge in our skull is highly receptive, and we know we need to feed it the right nutrients to avoid the cortisol tiger.
Right. The how is the next step.
Exactly. Well, absolutely. Let's transition into the how. How do we intentionally curate these thoughts when we are already exhausted?
The research outlines 3 specific pillars of nighttime positivity. Let's break those down thoroughly.
Let's do it. The first pillar is gratitude reflection. Now, gratitude is a word that gets thrown around a lot in the wellness space. What does it actually mean in a neurological context?
Gratitude reflection is remarkably simple in its mechanical execution, but profoundly impactful in its neurochemistry. The practice requires you to actively, consciously recall 3 to 5 specific moments from your day that brought you a sense of joy, satisfaction, or peace.
3 to 5 moments.
Yes. And the critical parameter here is that these moments can be microscopically small.
I think the small part is where people get tripped up, because some days are just objectively terrible from start to finish.
But true. Not every day is a win.
Right. You aren't going to be grateful for a promotion or winning the lottery every day. Right. If I have a miserable Tuesday where everything goes wrong, my gratitude might literally just be, I am grateful the coffee was hot this morning, or I am grateful that one stranger held the elevator door for me.
And that is perfectly sufficient.
But why does focusing on a fleeting 5-second moment of hot coffee matter so much to the architecture of the brain?
It matters because it forcefully interrupts a deep-seated evolutionary survival mechanism. If we zoom out to the broader picture of human evolution, our brains possess a severe built-in negativity bias.
We're wired to look for the bad stuff.
Accurately put, we are hardwired to constantly scan our environment for what is lacking, what is dangerous, or what went wrong. Historically, remembering where the poisonous berries were, or remembering which cave had the bear in it, kept our ancestors alive. Remembering a pretty sunset did not.
So survival depended on the negative.
Yes. Therefore, your brain naturally clings to negative events like Velcro, and positive events slide off like Teflon.
Okay, so my brain is designed to remember that my boss snapped at me, but designed to completely forget that a coworker complimented my presentation.
That's a brilliant observation. Gratitude reflection is the manual override of that bias. It actively forces the brain to shift its computational focus from lacks and threats to abundances and safety.
So we are forcing the issue.
Right. When you force your brain to acknowledge positive moments, even tiny ones, it triggers the release of the neurotransmitter serotonin.
Serotonin, the mood stabilizer.
Yes. Serotonin is often referred to as the brain's mood stabilizer. It promotes a deep, pervasive sense of calm and well-being. More importantly for our purposes, serotonin is the chemical precursor to melatonin.
And melatonin is what puts us to sleep.
Spot on. It's the hormone that orchestrates your sleep cycle. You are literally building the chemical bridge to sleep by thinking about hot coffee.
Okay, so pillar 1, gratitude, gets the serotonin flowing and builds the bridge.
Now for the second pillar.
Right. Pillar 2 is visualization. Now, I've always found visualization a bit tricky to grasp. It can sometimes feel a bit like unstructured daydreaming, which usually just leads my mind wandering back to my anxieties.
That's a very common pitfall.
The research describes it specifically as mental rehearsal. What does that actually look like in practice, particularly for someone learning a language?
The distinction between daydreaming and visualization is intentionality. Think of visualization not as a passive fantasy, but as an active, highly directed mental construction.
Okay, so I'm building a scene.
Yes. Let's say you are an English learner, and you have a high-stakes presentation or a speaking exam the next day. Visualization involves closing your eyes and vividly constructing the successful outcome in sensory detail.
Give me an example of the sensory details.
You imagine the physical sensation of standing confidently. You picture the lighting in the room. You hear your own voice speaking the English vocabulary clearly and at a perfect pace.
So it's not just thinking, I'll do well, it's feeling it.
Absolutely. You see the audience or the examiner nodding in agreement. You try to conjure the actual feeling of accomplishment in your chest.
But I need to push back on this a little. How does simply imagining a successful presentation actually help me perform it better?
It's a fair question.
If I don't know the vocabulary, imagining that I know it isn't going to magically teach me the words, am I just hyping myself up with a placebo effect?
It is far more profound than a psychological placebo. This brings us to one of the most exciting discoveries in modern neuroscience: neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change.
Yes, it's the brain's ability to fundamentally reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout your life. What advanced fMRI scans have revealed is that when you vividly and intensely visualize an action in rich detail, your brain activates the exact same neural pathways and motor cortex regions as it does when you physically perform that action in reality.
Wait, really? Are you saying the physical brain cannot tell the difference between me actually giving a speech and me just intensely imagining giving the speech?
On a fundamental neurological level, the distinction is incredibly blurry. The neurons fire in the same sequence. By visualizing success, you are essentially tricking your brain into logging the future event as a successful past experience.
That is wild.
You are building and reinforcing the neural architecture for fluency and confidence before you ever step into the room. You are laying down the neurological tracks in the safety of your bed so the train of your thoughts can run smoothly along them the next day. You are lowering the cognitive friction.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. Okay, so we are shifting focus with gratitude to get serotonin. We are physically building neural pathways with visualization.
And then we move to the final pillar.
The third pillar is affirmations. These are the short, empowering statements we repeat to ourselves. Things like, I am capable and growing every day.
Right.
I have to admit, and I think a lot of listeners will agree, when you first start doing affirmations, it can feel a little silly. It feels a bit like a cliche self-help seminar.
That skepticism is a very common and understandable reaction. But we have to look past the cultural cliche and examine what affirmations are mechanically doing to the brain's linguistic processing centers.
So they have a mechanical function.
Without a doubt. They're specifically designed to overwrite the subconscious corrupted code we discussed in your computer analogy earlier. Most people, especially adult learners stepping outside their comfort zone, suffer from a constant punishing stream of negative subconscious chatter.
Oh, I am completely guilty of this. The catastrophizing. I make one minor mistake. Maybe I use the wrong verb tense in an email, or I mispronounce a word during a meeting, and suddenly my brain spirals out of control.
It escalates very quickly.
It really does. The inner monologue goes, I am terrible at English. I will never actually learn this. Everyone in that meeting thinks I am an idiot. I am never going to get promoted. I am going to lose my job.
It goes from a minor grammatical error to total life destruction in 3 seconds flat.
To build on your point, that spiral is the defining characteristic of catastrophizing. It takes a singular, highly specific, and minor data point, and the amygdala extrapolates it into a catastrophic identity crisis.
So how do affirmations stop that?
Affirmations are the deliberate, forceful interruption of that specific neural loop. When you consciously repeat a phrase like, "My English improves with every single mistake I make," you are consciously forcing a new narrative into the default mode network.
You are just interrupting the spiral. You are providing the brain with an alternative script.
Right.
You are replacing the corrupted, anxiety-inducing code with functional, resilient code right before the system powers down for the night.
I love the idea of providing an alternative script. So we have the 3 pillars: gratitude, visualization, and affirmations. Now, I want to pivot and connect this general science of sleep optimization directly to the core demographic of our listener.
A very important pivot.
If you are listening to this deep dive, you are on a journey to master the English language. Why is this specific nighttime routine, this exact combination of pillars, such an absolute game changer for language fluency? What is the connection between sleep science and linguistics?
The connection lies in how we address one of the most significant, deeply painful, yet least talked about barriers to adult language acquisition: imposter syndrome.
Oh, that's a big one.
This psychological phenomena is incredibly prevalent among intermediate and advanced learners. When you are a beginner, you don't know enough to be embarrassed. But as an intermediate learner, you have acquired enough knowledge to be painfully aware of what you don't know.
The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Spot on. You develop this nagging, persistent, exhausting feeling of being a fraud. You hyperfixate on your accent, or you feel deep burning shame when you can't recall a specific vocabulary word that you know you studied.
I want to spend a second on that feeling because it's so specific. It's the feeling of a split identity. In your native language, you are a smart, funny, competent adult. You can debate politics, you can tell complex jokes, you command respect.
But then you switch languages.
Right. When you switch to English, you suddenly feel like you are presenting as a stumbling, simplistic child. The gap between your actual intelligence and your expressive ability in the new language breeds this intense feeling of, I am just pretending to speak English, and any second now, everyone is going to expose me as an imposter. It drains your energy.
It's exhausting.
So how does getting these bedtime wins directly fight that deep-seated psychological complex?
It fights it by dismantling the evidence. Imposter syndrome thrives on an accumulation of perceived daily failures. Your brain acts like a biased prosecutor, gathering every mispronounced word and awkward pause as evidence that you're a fraud.
So we have to fight the prosecutor.
Accurately stated. By forcing your brain to tally up your daily successes right before sleep, through gratitude and visualization, you are systematically destroying the prosecutor's case. You are forcing the brain to acknowledge competence.
That's powerful.
But beyond the massive psychological relief, there is a profound, literal, structural benefit to how your brain stores language memory.
Right. Let's talk about the mechanics of memory. I'm fascinated by what physically happens to vocabulary words when we go to sleep.
Extensive data, including deep studies into cognitive psychology, draw a direct, undeniable link between pre-sleep positivity and enhanced REM sleep.
REM sleep, rapid eye movement.
Yes. REM sleep is the critical phase of your sleep cycle, where the brain does its heavy structural lifting regarding memory consolidation. When you fall asleep in a positive, serotonin-rich, low-cortisol state, your REM cycles are significantly longer, deeper, and more efficient.
Okay, so to use another analogy, during the waking day, when I am listening to a podcast, reading an article, or speaking with a colleague, I am essentially just collecting puzzle pieces.
I like this imagery.
Right, I am gathering raw materials, new words, syntax rules, phrasal verbs, but I am not actually putting the puzzle together while I am awake.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. During the day, you are just piling the puzzle pieces on the table. During REM sleep, the brain acts like an incredibly efficient, highly skilled archivist working in a vast library.
The archivist goes to work.
Absolutely. The archivist takes the short-term memories, the temporary sticky notes of the words and grammar you encounter that day, and begins sifting through them. The brain literally, physically alters the synaptic connections between neurons to move that fragile short-term information into robust long-term storage.
So they actually snap together.
Yes. The research we are looking at specifically used the imagery of the brain consolidating English grammar like puzzle pieces, snapping together into a permanent picture.
And what happens if I go to bed stressed out, with cortisol pumping through my veins?
If you go to bed stressed, it is the equivalent of a blaring fire alarm going off in the library. The archivist drops all the files, scatters the puzzle pieces, and runs for cover.
Oh, wow. So the work just stops.
The short-term memories degrade, and you wake up unable to remember the vocabulary you spent hours studying. A positive pre-sleep routine ensures the archivist has the quiet, calm, well-lit environment necessary to do this highly complex filing work.
That is such a vivid picture. And what about this concept of incidental learning that came up in the data? I saw that phrase and it sounded almost like a linguistic superpower. What does that mean?
It truly functions like a cognitive superpower. Incidental learning refers to the language acquisition that happens without any conscious, directed effort.
Like learning by accident.
In a way, yes. It is your brain picking up the natural cadence of a sentence, the subtle intonations of a question, or the unwritten contextual rules of when to use a specific idiom.
And this happens during sleep.
When your brain is optimized through pre-sleep positivity and your REM sleep is extended and protected, your brain continues to process and integrate all the ambient English language you were exposed to during the day. Even the background noise, the casual conversations you overheard, the things you weren't actively trying to memorize with flashcards.
So you are literally biologically learning English in your sleep, provided you set the neurochemical stage correctly before you close your eyes.
That's a brilliant observation.
And of course, there is the most obvious fundamental benefit: you actually get restorative sleep. The data on sleep optimization shows that this habit slashes insomnia rates by up to 30%.
30% is a huge clinical improvement.
It's massive for a working adult. If you are sleeping 30% better, you are waking up with the actual physical energy required to read a dense article in English, or listen to a complex podcast, or engage in a challenging conversation without feeling like a zombie running on caffeine.
The foundation of all cognitive effort, every single aspect of language learning, relies on restorative sleep. If we can slash insomnia, we multiply your functional capacity to learn. It is the ultimate force multiplier.
Okay, I love the theory. The neuroscience is compelling, the analogies make sense, but we have to be honest, life throws massive curveballs.
It certainly does.
Theory is easy when you are reading it in a book, but it is incredibly difficult when you are actually in the trenches of daily life. Let's look at how to apply this in high-stress, unpredictable, real-world language environments.
Let's run through some scenarios.
Let's walk through some very specific, highly relatable scenarios. Here is scenario 1. The frustrating English class. Let's set the stage. You're an adult learner. You have just finished a really tough, interactive online English class after a long day of work.
You're already tired.
Exactly. You were trying to use new idioms in conversation, and you just totally stumbled over the phrase, kick the bucket. You used it in the wrong context. The teacher awkwardly corrected you in front of the other students. You felt a hot flush of embarrassment, and you logged off feeling like a complete failure.
That's a painful moment.
You get into bed thinking, I am too old for this. I am never going to get this right. How do we use the 3 pillars to biologically shift this state?
In this scenario, the immediate overwhelming instinct is to carry that intense embarrassment right into the bed. To execute the shift, we must start with the physiology, not the psychology.
Okay, start with the body.
Yes. The learner gets into bed, turns off the lights, and begins with deliberate, deep breathing. The 4-4 method is highly effective here. Inhale slowly for 4 seconds, hold the breath for 4 seconds, exhale smoothly for 4 seconds.
What does that do?
This pattern manually stimulates the vagus nerve, which overrides the sympathetic nervous system's stress response.
You are sending a physical signal to the amygdala saying, the tiger is gone, we are safe.
Accurately put, once the heart rate settles and the breathing is regulated, we move to pillar 1, gratitude.
But the instinct is to just focus entirely on the failure of kick the bucket.
And that's where the learner must force a shift in focus. The gratitude statement becomes, today, despite the struggle, I learned 3 new idioms. Piece of cake, hit the nail on the head, and under the weather. That is concrete, undeniable progress compared to yesterday.
You are actively forcing the brain's prosecutor to look at the 3 pieces of evidence proving you got it right, rather than obsessing over the 1 piece of evidence where you got it wrong.
Spot on.
Then we move to visualization. What are we picturing here? Because I don't want to just picture the embarrassing moment again.
You visualize tomorrow's class. You step into the role of a film director constructing the scene. You vividly imagine yourself being given a speaking task. You see yourself taking a calm breath, smiling naturally and confidently using the idiom break a leg in the perfect context.
So you script a win.
You imagine the physical feeling of the words flowing smoothly from your mouth, and you visualize the teacher giving a clear, encouraging nod of approval. You conjure that feeling of satisfaction in your body right now.
And finally, the affirmation to lock that new neural pathway in. What is the script?
The affirmation is, my English improves with every mistake I make. I am a resilient learner.
I really like the deliberate use of the word resilient there. It doesn't engage in toxic positivity. It doesn't pretend the mistake didn't happen. Rather, it changes your fundamental relationship to the mistake.
It frames the mistake as useful.
It turns the mistake from a source of shame into a necessary stepping stone. And the result of doing this, the research we looked at regarding EFL English as a foreign language reported a 25% faster idiom mastery rate among students using this exact routine.
25% is a massive jump.
That is a massive acceleration in fluency, entirely generated from changing how you process an error before bed.
It is a significant acceleration because it prevents the brain from attaching negative emotional valence to the new vocabulary. When words are associated with shame, humiliation, or fear, the brain's protective mechanisms actively avoid recalling them.
So it hides the words to protect you.
Exactly. By intentionally filing the new vocabulary under the emotional categories of resilience and progress, recall the next day becomes frictionless.
Let's ramp up the stakes significantly. Scenario 2. Post-workday blues in a high-pressure corporate environment. Let's say you're working in an English-speaking multinational office, maybe in the heart of the DACA hustle, where the pressure to perform is immense.
Very high stake.
You had a major high-stakes client call, you are presenting the quarterly data, the pressure is on, and you completely mix up the critical words revenue and profit.
Oh, that's a tough one to mix up.
You realize it the moment it leaves your mouth. The client looks confused, and you are left red-faced, stumbling to correct yourself. You go home, the commute takes 2 hours, and your stomach is in knots. You are terrified you ruin the account. How do we deploy the routine when the stress is tied to your livelihood?
This is a critical high-stakes scenario because intense work stress creates a massive sustained spike in cortisol. Cortisol is the absolute chemical enemy of the deep REM sleep cycles required for professional vocabulary retention and executive function.
So if you don't clear the cortisol out,
If you don't clear from your bloodstream, you will not consolidate the language you need to perform better tomorrow. You will wake up exhausted and even more prone to errors.
so we get in bed, we do the 4-4-4 breathing. We need to journal mentally. What is the gratitude in a situation where you feel like you failed publicly?
The gratitude requires zooming out to gain perspective. It is a macro view. I stepped into the arena. I handled a high-pressure client call entirely in my second language, English, for 20 minutes straight. Regardless of the stumble, that stamina is a huge professional win compared to my abilities last year.
That is a phenomenal reframe. You are acknowledging the raw endurance and the bravery it took just to conduct business in a non-native language. You separate the performance from the single error.
That separation is vital.
Then we move to the visualization, the mental rehearsal. Do we just pretend the mistake never happened? Do we try to block it out?
No, blocking it out gives it power. Instead, we actively edit the memory. This is a powerful cognitive behavioral technique. You replay the call in your mind, but you act as an editor splicing in the corrected, perfected version.
Oh, you edit the tape.
Spot on. You see yourself standing in the boardroom or looking into the webcam, making solid eye contact, and you clearly, authoritatively state, our new revenue streams will boost overall profits by 15%.
You see the successful version.
You imagine the clients nodding and understanding, taking notes, and expressing approval. You overwrite the neurological glitch with a smooth, successful performance.
You're basically recording a new, flawless take in the recording studio of your mind. And the affirmation for this corporate scenario.
The affirmation focuses on the utility of the stress. Challenges sharpen my professional skills. Tomorrow, I will speak with clarity and authority.
That is so empowering. As we analyzed earlier, work stress ruins sleep by keeping cortisol artificially high. This specific script forces the brain to release serotonin, pushing you into that vital REM sleep.
It changes the physical state.
You turn the overwhelming feeling of, I can't do this job, into, I am adapting to this job.
And if we look at the trajectory of language learners, That cognitive transition is the exact difference between an intermediate learner who plateaus due to workplace anxiety and an advanced learner who uses workplace challenges as the raw fuel for rapid fluency acquisition.
This is brilliant. Okay, let's keep moving through these real-life applications, because stress doesn't just clock out at 5 p.m. It follows us home. It follows us into our living rooms, into our kitchens, and onto our screens.
It's pervasive.
This brings us to scenario 3, and I think this one will resonate incredibly deeply with many listeners. Family tensions and accent mocking. Let's set the scene with some painful realism.
This is a sensitive area.
Very. You are having dinner with your extended family. The conversation is a fluid mix of your native language, say Bangla or Spanish, and English. You use a complex English phrase to explain something from work, and a sibling or a relative openly mocks your accent.
Ouch.
They laugh and call it a textbook accent, or maybe they mimic your pronunciation in an exaggerated way. It stings. It feels deeply personal and uniquely painful because it's coming from your own family.
Those comments always hit the hardest.
You retreat, you stay quiet the rest of the night, and you go to bed feeling deeply resentful, angry, and incredibly self-conscious about your voice.
This scenario highlights how deep-seated emotional baggage disrupts our fundamental biology. When you feel judged, mocked, or alienated by loved ones, it triggers a very specific type of social emotional stress.
How does that affect sleep?
This social pain registers in the brain similarly to physical pain, severely disrupting the production of melatonin. Melatonin is the master hormone responsible for regulating your circadian rhythm and signaling to your body that it is time to sleep. Without it, you are left staring at the ceiling for hours, trapped in a loop of anger.
So we need to counter that intense emotional sting. We are in bed, the lights are off, maybe we put on some soft, calming English instrumental music or a nature soundscape to break the silence. How do we possibly find genuine gratitude when we are feeling burning resentment?
It requires a highly mature, conscious cognitive shift. The gratitude statement cannot be about the argument. It might be. Family time means laughter, even when the humor is misplaced or there are bumps in the road. However, I am deeply proud of my own private progress. I understood 90% of the rapid-fire dialogue in the English movie we watched tonight.
You change the subject internally.
You acknowledge the social tension, but you firmly anchor your gratitude to your internal objective progress, completely detaching it from their external reaction.
You are taking your power back from their judgment. Then the visualization. How do we visualize a better outcome here without just imagining getting into a shouting match or perfectly insulting them back?
You visualize sophisticated social agility. You picture the next family gathering. Someone makes a similar teasing comment, but instead of shrinking inward or lashing out in anger, you visualize yourself smiling warmly, unbothered, and delivering a witty, perfectly timed comeback in flawless English.
So you keep your cool.
You imagine saying something culturally relevant like, well, that plot twist was a real curveball. You visualize your relaxed body language, and you see the tension dissolving into genuine shared laughter. You are internally rehearsing unshakable confidence.
I love that approach. You aren't rehearsing a fight. You are rehearsing being completely unflappable. And the affirmation to seal this in.
My voice is unique, it carries my history, and it is constantly improving. I use my language to connect deeply with others.
That is beautiful. My voice is unique and carries my history. It completely neutralizes the sting of being mocked for an accent. As an adult English learner, your accent is not a mistake. It is the auditory proof of your journey.
It's a badge of honor.
It shows you speak multiple languages. And you mentioned earlier in our notes, for intermediate learners, this specific type of emotional reframing is a fantastic mechanism for building advanced emotional vocabulary.
That's a great point to highlight.
You start moving beyond simple primary color words like sad or mad, and you start internally processing complex emotional concepts like resentment versus forgiveness or alienation versus connection in English.
To expand on that, you are essentially turning your own emotional life into a highly advanced, personalized language laboratory. You are learning to articulate your deepest internal states in your target language.
Let's move to scenario 4. Exam anxiety. The big ones. The acronyms that strike fear into the hearts of learners everywhere. TOEFL, IELTS, Cambridge.
Those exams carry a lot of weight.
The pressure surrounding these exams is immense because these scores often determine the trajectory of a person's life, university admissions, international visas, career opportunities. Let's say you just bombed a major practice test.
A terrible feeling.
That terrible scores are staring back at you from the screen, completely mocking the hundreds of hours of effort you have put in. Pure panic is setting in. Your chest is tight.
Exam anxiety is perhaps the purest, most concentrated modern form of the physiological fight-or-flight response we discussed earlier. Your primitive brain views that failing practice score not as a test of knowledge, but as a literal existential threat to your future survival.
It thinks your life is in danger.
Without a doubt, it triggers a massive cortisol dump that blocks sleep entirely. We have to disarm that existential threat immediately before sleep is even possible.
Bedtime ritual time. What is our gratitude here when the data says we are failing?
We must actively search for the micrometric of improvement, no matter how small. I scored a 20 out of 30 on the reading comprehension section today. While not my final goal, that is objectively, mathematically better than the 15 I scored last month.
You just cling to the math.
We force the panic brain to acknowledge the upward trajectory, deliberately ignoring the final destination for just this moment.
You find the specific, undeniable data point that proves you are moving forward. Then, visualization. I imagine this pillar is absolutely crucial for high-stakes exam prep.
It is arguably the most critical cognitive tool available to test takers. You visualize exam day in painstaking detail. And this is vital. You don't just visualize getting a paper with a good score on it. You visualize the process of taking the test calmly.
The process, not the result.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see yourself walking into the testing center, sitting at the assigned desk, and opening the booklet or looking at the computer screen. You vividly imagine the listening section starting, the voice coming through the headphones, and you whisper internally, "I am prepared. I trust the process."
Rehearsing the calmness.
You imagine the physical feeling of the pencil in your hand or your fingers on the keyboard, feeling completely physically relaxed and hyper-focused.
Because of neuroplasticity, you are essentially letting your brain take the test successfully and calmly a dozen times before you ever sit in the actual exam room. The environment won't feel threatening because your brain feels like it has been there before. And the affirmation,
My mind is sharp, my preparation is solid, and success flows naturally.
the data we reviewed noted that language learners who consistently use this mental rehearsal protocol see score jumps of 5 to 10 points on standardized tests.
That's a statistically significant jump.
That is the literal difference between passing and failing or getting into your dream university versus being waitlisted, all generated from optimizing your brain state before sleep.
It's all about preparation.
All right, scenario 5. This is the modern plague for learners. Social media doom scrolling.
Oh, this is a big one.
You are lying in bed, the room is dark, but your phone is glowing inches from your face, and you are endlessly scrolling through Instagram or TikTok. You see all these polished language influencers, these seemingly flawless polyglots, living perfect lives in aesthetic coffee shops, speaking effortless English.
It creates a lot of insecurity.
You instantly feel a crushing wave of not good enough. You feel so far behind that you wonder why you are even trying.
Social media comparison is a highly engineered, algorithmically optimized machine for fueling our evolutionary negativity bias. It artificially inflates the curated successes of others while simultaneously highlighting our own deepest insecurities.
And what does that do to our sleep?
Physiologically, it is a disaster for sleep. The blue light emitted from the screen actively suppresses the pineal gland's release of melatonin, while the rapid, unpredictable scrolling creates chaotic, exhausting dopamine spikes that leave your nervous system wired, agitated, and empty.
So the very first step in the shift here has to be a hard behavioral boundary. The phone goes away, physically out of reach, 1 full hour before bed, period. Non-negotiable.
That is the crucial first step.
Once the screen is dark and the brain starts to detox, what is our gratitude?
You must pivot your attention from what you lack, compared to others online, to what you gained in reality today. I followed 3 new, high-quality English educational channels today, and I successfully absorbed and understood several complex new phrases.
You focus entirely on your own actionable inputs, not their curated outputs. And the visualization.
You mentally put yourself in the role of the creator, not the passive consumer. You visualize yourself confidently recording and posting a video or a story in fluent English.
Stepping into the spotlight.
You imagine the deep satisfaction of expressing your own ideas clearly, and you picture supportive, encouraging comments pouring in from your own learning community. You visualize owning your unique progress publicly and proudly.
And the affirmation to close out the doom-scrolling spiral.
Progress, not perfection. I am walking my own unique path.
Progress, not perfection. Honestly, that should be printed on a t-shirt and given to every single language learner on the planet. By putting the phone away and running this specific script, you are manually resetting your dopamine levels.
It restores balance.
You transition from a state of anxious, hollow comparison to a state of calm, grounded self-assurance. And as we know, that calm state is exactly what aids the overnight, long-term memory consolidation of grammar rules.
It is fundamentally about reclaiming sovereignty over your mental environment. You absolutely cannot consolidate complex grammatical structures if your brain's processing power is entirely consumed by feeling inferior to a 20-second video of an Instagram model.
Let's do a quick, expanded lightning round of a few other everyday scenarios where this framework applies, just to demonstrate how incredibly versatile this tool is. What about a health scare or a minor illness? Say a really bad seasonal cold hits. You are bedridden and you are terrified it's going to ruin your 100-day language app streak or completely derail your study schedule.
Illness naturally amplifies cognitive pessimism because your body's physical resources are severely depleted. The biological priority is survival, not learning.
So how do we shift that?
The shift here is vital to aid recovery. Gratitude. My body is actively doing the hard work of healing right now. Rest is my necessary ally. Visualization. You imagine waking up 2 days from now feeling vibrant, taking a deep, clear breath, and tackling your English lessons with fresh, fully restored energy.
And the affirmation.
Affirmation. Health supports my goals. I bounce back stronger.
And the science backing this mind-body connection is wild. The field of psychoneuroimmunology, which is the study of how psychological states affect the immune system, shows that intentional positivity literally boosts white blood cell activity and immune markers, physically speeding up your recovery time.
It's an incredible feedback loop.
What about dating jitters? You are living abroad, you go on a coffee date, you are trying to be charming and funny in English, and it is just incredibly awkward. You can't find the right words, the jokes fall flat, and you go home cringing.
Social vulnerability in a second language is exceptionally brave. You affirm. Authentic connections grow with practice and patience. You reframe the event. Every awkward conversation is vital data collection for the next smoother conversation. You visualize the next date flowing easily.
A fitness fail. You were too exhausted to go to the gym after studying, and now you are lying in bed beating yourself up about being lazy.
You visualize tomorrow's run or workout feeling strong and capable, and you affirm. My body thrives on consistency, and rest is part of that cycle. You absolutely refuse to dwell on the missed day. You instantly mentally prep the neural pathways for the next opportunity.
Financial pinch. Rent is due, the bills are piling up, the inflation rate is terrifying, and the sheer mathematical stress is keeping your eyes wide open at 2 a.m.
Financial stress is a massive cortisol trigger. Gratitude must focus on immediate safety and future potential. I have shelter tonight, and I am actively daily building high-value skills, like mastering the English language that will directly allow me to thrive financially and open new career doors in the future.
These examples show such incredible versatility. Whatever the specific stressor is, be it grammar, money, health, or family, you can adapt this 3-pillar framework to neutralize the cortisol.
It works for almost any stressor.
And as the research pointed out, practicing these scripts aloud in your bedroom gives you a massive dual win. You get the neurological benefits of positivity, and you get to physically polish your English pronunciation and mouth muscle memory in a zero-stress environment.
The aloud practice is a great bonus.
Okay, let's take a breath and transition slightly. To truly internalize this practice, to make it part of your identity, we should look at this specific high-level English vocabulary that the literature uses to describe this very process. Mastering these advanced terms doesn't just improve your vocabulary score, it fundamentally deepens your psychological understanding of what you're doing.
I agree completely. Language actively shapes our perception of reality. When we possess precise, nuanced words to describe our internal states and processes, we inherently gain more executive control over those states.
Let's do a deep dive into some of these key terms. I will throw out a word, and let's explore its nuances, its roots, and how it applies to us. The first one is actually a pair of words because they operate hand in hand in this behavioral process: efficacy and tenacity.
Those are excellent, robust choices. Let's start by unpacking efficacy. It is a beautiful, highly formal noun. At its core, it means the ability to produce a desired or intended result.
So effectiveness.
In simpler, everyday terms, it means effectiveness, but it carries a more scientific or proven weight. When we talk about the efficacy of nightly affirmations, we are asking the rigorous question: does this practice actually work biologically? Does it definitively produce the desired result of deeper sleep and accelerated English retention?
And the studies say yes.
And as we've discussed, the empirical studies prove its high efficacy.
I love how that word sounds. It sounds so much more authoritative and precise than just saying it works really well. The efficacy of the routine. It sounds like you are a scientist of your own life. And then there is tenacity. What is the root of that?
Tenacity is the vital engine that drives efficacy. Tenacity comes from the Latin root tenacitas, meaning the act of holding fast or gripping tightly. It means persistent determination.
Pure grit.
It is pure grit. It is perseverance in the face of friction. It is the rare quality of holding on tightly to a long-term goal and absolutely refusing to let go, even when the immediate circumstances are incredibly difficult or discouraging.
So bringing it into our context, you need the tenacity to maintain this new bedtime routine, especially on night 4 or night 5 when the novelty is worn off, when you are exhausted and you just want to collapse and doom scroll. The actual efficacy of the habit relies entirely on your tenacity to perform it daily, even when you don't feel like it.
That is the exact relationship. You cannot possibly experience the neurological efficacy of the neuroplasticity without the behavioral tenacity to repeat the action. They are symbiotic.
Okay, here's a really fun one. Serendipity. I just love the phonetic rhythm of this word. Serendipity.
It is frequently cited as one of the most universally beloved words in the English language. Serendipity refers to the occurrence and development of events by pure chance, but specifically in a happy or highly beneficial way.
So a happy accident.
It is a happy accident or a fortunate unexpected discovery. The word actually originates from an old Persian fairy tale called The Three Princes of Serendip, where the heroes were always making discoveries by accident and sagacity.
It's a great story, but how does an old fairy tale about hacky accidents apply to positive thinking before sleep? Are we just crossing our fingers and hoping for linguistic happy accidents?
We are not passively hoping, we are actively inviting. When you consistently practice nighttime positivity, you drastically lower your baseline anxiety and increase your cognitive openness.
You're opening doors.
This means you wake up more alert, more curious, and much more receptive to your environment. Because you aren't drowning in cortisol, you are far more likely to strike up a spontaneous conversation with a native speaker at a coffee shop. Or you might stumble upon a brilliant English podcast while browsing, simply because your brain is open to recognizing opportunity rather than being closed off by fear.
It primes the brain.
Bedtime positivity creates the exact neurological conditions that invite serendipity to occur in your language journey.
That makes total sense. You are essentially making your own luck by priming your brain's reticular activating system to notice it. Next pair of words: rejuvenation and wholesome.
Rejuvenation is the biological and psychological process of making someone look or feel better, younger, or more vital. It is the total restoration of depleted energy. A deep, REM-rich sleep cycle, brought on by a quiet amygdala, provides total cognitive and physical rejuvenation. You wake up feeling like your battery is at 100%.
And wholesome. I have to be honest, I usually only hear that word applied to things like organic whole wheat bread or maybe very innocent family movies. It sounds a bit old-fashioned.
It is very often used in those contexts, yes. But fundamentally, wholesome means conducive to or promoting moral, physical, or general well-being. It means deeply healthy and purely beneficial.
So wholesome thoughts are just healthy thoughts.
In our psychological context, we are talking about wholesome thoughts. Thoughts of deep gratitude, patience, and resilience are wholesome because they actively promote your psychological health, which directly leads to wholesome, restorative, physical rest.
Wholesome thoughts make for wholesome rest. That is actually a really great, simple mantra. Finally, let's look at mindfulness. This is a massive cultural buzzword right now. You see it on every app and magazine cover. But stripping away the yoga studio cliches, what does it precisely mean in the context of brain mechanics?
Stripping away the commercialization. Mindfulness is simply the psychological process of purposely bringing your full attention to experiences occurring in the present moment without any judgment. It is raw presence and contained awareness.
So when I am lying in bed, taking those 4-second deep breaths and intentionally focusing all my mental energy on my gratitude list instead of allowing my mind to worry about tomorrow's overflowing inbox, I am actively practicing mindfulness.
Yes, mindfulness before bed is the cognitive anchor. It is the tool that amplifies all the positive effects. It is the mechanism that stops the default mode network from dragging you into the regrets of the past or the anxieties of the future, firmly anchoring you in the physical safety of the present moment, the feeling of the blankets, the sound of your breath, so that the biological process of sleep can take over.
I have a challenge for everyone listening to this deep dive right now. Tonight, when you are lying in bed doing your visualization or your affirmations, I challenge you to take 3 of these advanced words, maybe efficacy, tenacity, and serendipity, and actively use them in your internal monologue. Build them directly into your affirmations. Let's really put that neuroplasticity to work with high-level vocabulary.
That's fantastic application of the theory.
All right, we are entering the home stretch of this deep dive. We have comprehensively covered the neurological why, we have outlined the strategic what, and we just mastered the vocabulary. Now we need the tactical how. How do we take all this brilliant neuroscience, all these inspiring concepts, and actually forge them into a daily habit that sticks? Let's walk step by step through the 7-day starter plan and talk about how to overcome the inevitable realistic pitfalls.
The 7-day starter plan is purposefully designed to gradually build the neurological habit without overwhelming your already stressed system. Step 1 is preparation.
What does that entail?
You must curate your physical environment to support the chemical shifts. The room must be dark and cool to promote melatonin. Crucially, as we discussed, absolutely no devices in bed. The blue light and the dopamine loops are the sworn enemies of this practice.
The data we looked at suggested playing soft English audiobooks as part of the room prep. It specifically mentioned playing quiet excerpts from classic books like The Power of Positive Thinking. That seems like a really gentle, effective way to prime the brain with ambient English while you physically settle down.
It is an excellent strategy for passive, low-stress immersion. Step 2 is timing. You need a dedicated, protected 10 to 20-minute window. Use a timer app with gentle, fading chimes so you aren't constantly opening your eyes to check the clock, which inherently induces anxiety. Just let the time exist purely for your 3 pillars: gratitude, visualization, and affirmation.
And step 3 is tracking. This is where the morning journal comes into play. You wake up, keep a notebook by the bed, and briefly note, how did last night's positivity routine affect my energy today?
That tracking is vital.
And I really love this specific detail from the literature. Note new English words dreamed up. Because if your REM sleep is truly optimizing and the archivist is working perfectly, you might actually wake up with better vocabulary recall or remember phrases that surfaced in your dreams.
You undeniably will experience enhanced recall. And for the advanced learners listening, step 4 is the advanced twist. This is exactly what you just challenged the listeners to do. Infuse your nightly affirmations with your current target vocabulary.
Pushing it to the next level.
Instead of a simple basic affirmation like, I speak English well, elevate the syntax and vocabulary. Say, I articulate my complex thoughts eloquently and with great efficacy. By doing this, you are embedding high-level, sophisticated language directly into your deep subconscious programming while the brain is most receptive.
It is exactly like a parent sneaking healthy vegetables into a delicious fruit smoothie for a kid. Your brain is getting the sweet taste of positivity, but it is also getting a heavy, nutritious dose of advanced grammar and vocabulary.
It's a perfect analogy.
Now, let's talk about dodging the pitfalls. Because let's be realistic, building a new habit is never perfectly smooth. We're going to mess up. What is the most common mistake people make when they first attempt to start this routine?
The single most common pitfall is forcing it. People tend to treat this relaxing routine like just another high-pressure pass-or-fail task on their daily to-do list.
Making it a chore.
Right. If they get into bed and they literally can't think of 3 amazing things to be grateful for, they get stressed out about failing at gratitude. The solution is to keep the sessions incredibly light and forgiving. If you are thoroughly exhausted, remove all pressure. Start with just one tiny, undeniable gratitude. I am grateful my pillow is soft. That is enough to spark the initial serotonin release.
What about the reality of skipping days? You have a late night at work, you crash the second you get home, and suddenly a week goes by and you realize you haven't done the routine once. How do you recover?
This is where we introduce the behavioral psychology concept of habit stacking. You link the new, fragile habit, the positivity routine, to an old, deeply established, non-negotiable habit. You already brush your teeth every single night without fail.
So tie it to the brushing.
So you stack the new behavior on top of it. While I am standing at the sink brushing my teeth for 2 minutes, I will vividly think of my one gratitude. You anchor the new behavior to an automated one, bypassing the need for willpower.
That is incredibly practical. Another major pitfall the research highlighted is overthinking. You try to do the routine, but your mind just keeps violently racing back to your to-do list, and repeating the positive affirmations feels completely fake, like you are lying to yourself.
When the mind races, actively fighting it or getting angry at yourself usually makes the cortisol spike worse. The solution is applied mindfulness. You simply name the intrusive emotion.
Name it to tame it.
You pause and say internally, I am feeling deep anxiety about tomorrow's meeting right now. I acknowledge this feeling, and now I am choosing to release it. You label the feeling. The mere act of labeling an emotion moves the processing away from the emotional amygdala and into the logical prefrontal cortex, immediately reducing its physiological power over you.
I want to spend a moment on a very specific cultural context mentioned in our prep materials because I think it represents a lot of our listeners. It talked about the DACA hustle. For listeners living in incredibly high-pressure, hyper-fast-paced urban environments, places where you are juggling intense 12-hour jobs, chaotic, draining traffic, and heavy multi-generational family obligations. The idea of finding 20 minutes of perfect, uninterrupted zen in a dark room might feel completely laughable and impossible.
It is a very real, very valid constraint. We cannot ignore the reality of modern burnout. In environments characterized by extreme hustle and systemic stress, the neurological advice is to ruthlessly condense the practice.
How condensed?
Do a highly concentrated 2-minute microversion. As soon as your head physically hits the pillow, one deep 4-second breath, one quick, genuine gratitude, one 10-second visualization of tomorrow's first task going well. That 2-minute micro-routine can act as a cognitive superpower in a high-stress culture. It provides a tiny, vital oasis of serotonin in an overwhelming desert of cortisol.
Just 2 minutes. That's so achievable.
And to supplement that short nighttime window, utilizing English media during those long, stressful commutes, like listening to scientifically grounded shows such as the Happiness Lab podcast, can provide a steady drip of immersive positivity throughout the day, easing the heavy burden on the brief nighttime routine.
I love that. It is entirely about consistency, not duration. 2 minutes every night is infinitely better than 20 minutes once a month. To prove that this framework actually works in the real world, let's look at a couple of the highly inspiring case studies from the research. There was Aisha, an intermediate learner. Her story was incredible.
Yes, Aisha's case is a perfect example of overcoming the amygdala hijack. She was battling severe, paralyzing anxiety regarding her upcoming IELTS exam. The dread was so intense it was blocking her ability to study. She was completely plateaued.
So she used the positivity routine.
By implementing this pre-sleep positivity, specifically focusing her gratitude on acknowledging small daily micro-wins at her study sessions, she neutralized the fear. She built unstoppable psychological momentum and ultimately achieved a phenomenal 7.5 band score.
Yeah.
And just study harder. She optimized the brain that was doing the studying.
And then there was Rahim, the advanced corporate professional. He used the visualization pillar specifically to mentally rehearse his high-stakes client pitches in English while lying in bed. By vividly imagining his success, managing his vocal tone in his mind, and predicting client questions, he literally landed a massive promotion.
A fantastic outcome.
He turned his sleep cycle into his ultimate secret weapon for career advancement. These aren't just feel-good anecdotes. They are documented case studies in applied, self-directed neuroplasticity.
They perfectly illustrate the profound efficacy and the necessary tenacity we defined earlier in the deep dive.
All right, we have covered an immense amount of intellectual and practical ground today, from the default mode network to the etymology of tenacity. Let's summarize the absolute core message of this deep dive for the listener.
If we distill all the neuroscience, all the linguistics, and all the behavioral psychology down to its essence, the core message is this. Consciously embracing intentional, positive thinking before sleep is arguably the simplest, most accessible path to profound neurological change available to you.
It's right there for the taking.
It demands very little physical effort, requires no money, yet it delivers vastly better, deeper rest, a sharper, more efficient acquisition of the English language, and a significant, measurable reduction in your daily anxiety. By committing tonight, not tomorrow, but tonight, to just one reflection of gratitude, one vivid image of success, and one empowering affirmation, you physically prime your brain's architecture to wake up renewed, with your words flowing much more freely.
You are literally structurally rewiring your brain in the dark. It's incredible. But before we sign off and let you get to sleep, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you drift off tonight. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about the incredible power of the positive. We talked about how positive thoughts bloom like flowers overnight, snapping your grammar puzzle pieces together and boosting your fluency. But consider the inverse. What happens to the language, the vocabulary, the massive potential that we don't process positively?
It's a compelling question.
If negative thoughts sow fast-growing weeds in the brain, Does our unexamined negative self-talk, that constant imposter syndrome, that catastrophizing about our accents or our minor grammatical mistakes, does that become the invisible silent barrier to our fluency? Are the harsh words we quietly tell ourselves at midnight the very walls keeping us from speaking freely and confidently during the day? Think about that as you close your eyes tonight. What walls are you going to tear down? Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep, fascinating exploration of the mind and language. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We will see you next time.